All right. Welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked. As always, on behalf of Phil and Tony, I'm Matt, and we are stoked to be with you today, continuing our journey into just the truth of the human and especially the church, because we're all followers of Christ and we're all seeking to understand what it means, thy will be done here on earth as is in heaven. And so, as always, you can catch any of our former or previous episodes of New Wine Uncorked right here on YouTube. If you just hit subscribe right there, then you'll be subscribed to all of the YouTube videos that we release for New Wine. Things from articles that we have from our cultural encounters. We have a journal, an academic journal that you should check out. Just type in cultural encounters and from New Wine. And so we've got articles and author profiles on that. We also have New Wine tastings, where it's another set of recordings dealing with scholars and church leaders and local leaders on a number of theological topics. And then every Thursday, you can go live with us on Facebook, Facebook.com/New Wine, New Wineskins, where you can join us for a live discussion on many of these things. And then for those of you who are podcasters, just go to anchor.fm or go to Spotify or go to Google Podcasts, go to Apple Podcasts and type in New Wine Cast. It's the New Wine listening experience. And you'll be able to catch up any of the last New Wine Uncorked episodes that Phil and Tony and I have done, or get caught up on the New Wine tastings or any of the happenings of New Wine. So, and today we're stoked because we want to continue to press into this idea of, well, what does it mean to lead? What does it mean to lead? Just because you're up front doesn't always insinuate that you are a leader. And over these course of weeks, and especially this last 6 months or so with COVID-19, a lot of our topic has been about leadership. Topic within the nation is, are we being led appropriately? And so today's question is person up front, does that always make them a leader? And are the best leaders the ones that are up front, and especially in the church sense, the one who holds the pulpit, are they always the best leader? And does that insinuate that they're a leader? So that's where we stand today. As far as leadership in the church, guys, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I would say in just looking at the enormous amount of YouTube content that is being produced on a weekly basis because we're all in quarantine, the way that the contemporary evangelical church has shifted seems to be to really in an attempt to survive and weather the storm of COVID, they've really hunkered down and really put a much larger emphasis on what it means to be a leader within a corporation or an organization. And so it seems that the understanding of what it means to be a pastor is synonymous, if not defined by this ambiguous phrase of Christian leader. And unless we unpack our definition of leadership, we will allow current and contemporary understandings of leadership to infiltrate our understanding of Christian leadership, and then therefore our understanding of what a pastor is meant to be. And so I think in terms of the current landscape, what we see is skills that are being stressed that's required of pastors is entrepreneurship, innovation, managerial, and these terms seem to be taken from the business world. And what we see is, if you're a good leader within the business world, you will then be a good leader within the church. Because if you can manage a corporation or so forth, if you're a good executive, then you'll be a good pastor. And I think that's a crucial misstep that I'm seeing in regards to leadership, and then the way it bleeds into discipleship, and why we are in the state that we are, with the way that we don't know how to have a cordial conversation, in the way that we conduct ourselves in our disagreements. And so that, I think, is in large part because of the way that we don't properly define leadership.
Well, where do you think?
Definitely, Tony. Oh, I was gonna say definitely I agree with that, Tony. I'm thinking back to I did my undergraduate work in pastoral ministry, and yeah, during our kind of fourth year, we did a lot of kind of. Now our professor, the chair that we had at the time, he was pretty discerning in things that he pulled, but we pulled a lot of stuff from Harvard Business School on leadership, just trying to determine what does it mean to lead, and trying to compare some of that to what does it mean to lead as a pastor, and how do those things relate. And yeah, man, it becomes an interesting thing. There's a whole and another thing that you find from this is once you graduate a Bible college or seminary, and then you're thrust into leading, yeah, you're really ill equipped because you're not used to building an organization. You're used to preaching and talking about theology, but not necessarily building up a congregation, not necessarily building up an organization. And so you don't have normally the right tools that you would necessarily need from leading in the corporate world. So it's been a pretty interesting thing. So yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, like, I wonder how it is though. So you're right, Tony, that and Phil, like what you were saying is that people are thrust forward, and so these business models, and it's interesting because the school that I'm at, they have a leadership track, and it used to be Christian leadership, and what they've done is they've taken the adjective Christian out of it because they're afraid and trying to compete. Well, I don't know why they did because I wasn't a part of that decision, but it's interesting that you bring up the distinctions between Christian leadership and like business leadership, right? Like uh, the where I'm at wants to get more into worldly leadership, as if those, and so the distinctions are different. And so, do you see what is the fallout though when it comes to like discipleship?
I mean, so it's important. I think from the outset, I need to say it's important for pastors to learn how to stewardship the finances of a church well,
Mm.
because we've seen too many pastors either skim off of the top of their church's finances or mismanage the finances, and the church falls under. On the flip side of it, though, and I think Christian schools and seminaries are a good case study, because you see small Bible colleges need to add business majors to their course offerings in order to survive, because students want to get a business degree to make money, and so forth. And so you see almost this cognitive disconnect in the economy of the kingdom and the economy of Jesus, and the economy that Bible schools are training their students up to participate in. Because if our quote unquote secular or worldly culture and economy says amass resources, amass funds, this is how you accumulate and protect and save, that is but that is in stark contradiction to when Jesus says, man, it's harder for a wealthy person to enter the kingdom of heaven, or to go through the eye. It's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a wealthy person to enter the kingdom of heaven. I think there's something to be said about the way that Jesus puts forth our responsibility for finances and economics, and the way that the world puts forth, and now how Christian institutions and churches encourage young people to get educated in the business world. I mean, to what's his name with Dave Ramsey, the finance guru. Like, I can't begin to say the amount of times that I've been a part of a youth program where a youth leader is like, man, I think we really need to equip our young people financially. And it's like, okay, are we going to go to the biblical text? No. Dave Ramsey, does it fit in a phenomenal way. He has biblical principles. And I wonder, that's a failure in discipleship, where we relegate finances to biblical principles and not biblical teaching. Because what happens when we take seriously when Jesus says that the young rich ruler walked away sad because Jesus told him to sell everything? These are implications that I am terrified of, because it means so much for the current model that we do church under. And yeah.
Yeah, so man, and I just man, what am I trying to say here? Wondering how to get training in the business world to figure out how to run your organization as a church. I think that there's some benefits to the idea of knowing who you are as a leader, how you lead, those kind of things, and then other things like the business of the church, to have people that are good at that field. That would be that portion of delegation would be something that I would want as a leader. That, yeah, I would want someone that's good in that field to handle the money in that regard. But when I talk about discipleship, I don't necessarily want to turn all leaders into headhunters per se. I want to turn leaders into disciples. I want to disciple people in that way, to have them, yeah, to have them be more like Jesus. And I don't know if Jesus is a CEO. Is Jesus a CEO? We see that in the text. I don't think, yeah, I don't think we see carrying a cross. I don't think that happens at my, never mind, let me stop naming businesses. But but just wondering that those two seem to contradict so much that there's a level of, we need to step back and think, okay, what are we actually doing here? Is it a way of managing money? That's one thing. But building an organization and building your church, those aren't the same thing. So yeah, I just wonder, being a pastor that I didn't have that responsibility of having to build a church, that I didn't have that tension, so I didn't have to do that. But I wonder just how do pastors wrestle with that, and because in the end, building your organization as your church is gonna be what's the evaluation of your time as a leader typically, right? We're gonna look at how many people are coming to the church and how much money the church earns year over year. And it's tough to say that that's built into how we disciple, but that's built into how we disciple, right? I don't know. So yeah.
And I think because don't you think a lot of worldly leadership tends to be uh, quantitative as opposed to qualitative, so that a church leader who is much more and has an elder board that is much more business driven is going to be about the quantity, like Phil, you're saying, with the numbers, and like butts in the seats kind of thing. And there is a reality to that. But how do you look at that and kind of wrestle with the idea of, yes, the church does has a business side to it, but the main point of the church is what, and I think that's what establishes then the way in which we step into leadership within the church. Because like you were saying, Phil, I don't think, and there's a book that's like Jesus is my CEO, I think, I mean, we definitely conflate the business aspect, that a business leader is going to be a good church leader. One church that we were at, it was probably part of the reason why like legitimately were kicked out of the church. They brought us in. My wife was on staff. She was the children's pastor, and I was a co-pastor. And they brought us in, the two of us, and sat us down and said, look, because it's too much about, like, when I would preach, it was challenging people too much, because we were asking where they're at with Jesus, but one of the things that we had a contention with is when the idea of church leadership came up, they wanted specifically folks that had titles. They had to be CEO, they had to be a CFO, they had to be a person of business leadership. And my question always was, but does business leadership always translate to church leadership? Because in businesses, do you think discipleship is a natural part of who we are as people? Are we supposed to disciple one another?
Totally. I think regardless of whether or not you are a follower of Jesus, you are being discipled in a way. we're all experiencing formation, deformation, or reformation in some way in regards to culture, society, our beliefs, our value systems. I think where uh, the business world and its discipleship model functions and has been imported into the churches, we view people as resources. But I think within a kingdom economy, within a Jesus economy, people aren't resources. People are people. They're not a means to the end. They are the end. And so from that predisposition, uh, people aren't meant to be managed. They aren't meant to be quote unquote stewarded. They're meant to be loved. And to that point, we when we look at the early church, I think we see the clearest example of finances being managed is when it's being managed to be given away.
Mm.
But that's so antithetical to the business world because you don't give away your capital. You need to maintain and invest your capital. But for the early church, it was, this is an investment. This is a work of faithfulness and justice. We're going to give our money to the poor, to the widow, and to the orphan. This isn't about us trying to secure long-term returns. This is about us caring for the person in front of us with our resources, not viewing the person in front of us as a resource. And then we see that so clearly within the epistle to the Corinthian church. Like Paul saying, man, you guys are prioritizing the rich and you're making a mockery of communion. Like, what in the world are you doing? This is totally bogus. And Paul flips the entire paradigm that people are not resources, people are people. But I think somewhere along the way, in our desire to grow numerically and having numerics be the chief metric of church health and vitality, we've sold into the American dream that people are resources and we need to hoard and gather people to have larger resources. But this is also not to say that, man, large mega churches who prioritize church growth numerically haven't done good things. I mean, yes, they've taken care of the vulnerable, but I think we also need to say at what cost, though, on the other side. At what cost to their congregants, at what cost to their local community. Because for the good that they're doing, we can ask concrete examples of, as they grow as a church and they gain affluent members, what's the areas that they're gentrifying? What's the pollution and blueprint that they're leaving on their immediate surroundings and the like?
Yeah, I think at the end, Tony, all the questions you brought up at the end actually are real life questions when it comes to this, because you think of planting a multi ethnic church. That's going to take a lot longer than your typical 3 to 5 year plan when you're planning a predominantly anything church, because you're going to have an idea, you're going to have your target, and then you're going to go for it. But when you have a organization, when you have a church that you're going to build where it's going to be differences, and so you're anticipating conflict, you're anticipating all these things, and trying to build that. I mean, numerics is not going to be the answer as to what success looks like. And so, and I think this goes back to the conversation we've been having over the past little bit, is when we look at Jesus, what do we see? If we see him as a winner, as we see him as successful, and we want to see that our church is successful, then we're going to go in that vein and we're going to define success as the winner. But then if we see the church as changing lives, if we see the church as reaching to the least of these, that changes how we gauge our success. And it goes into just how you plant. Yeah, I'm thinking of the church planters I know, and the ones that, yeah, they go in hoping, all right, we know what the model is. We're planting a church. We're going forward to do it. And but then we ask, well, what are we actually trying to do here? What ministries are we asking to develop organically? and then we'll see how that grows about. And then that just changes what success looks like. For many churches, yeah, some Sunday morning is not the thing, because there's other things that they're looking for. Most churches, yeah. But at the same token, going back to what you said, Tony, um, oh man, um, um, there are a number of churches that look at their reaching out to the poor as charity, and they'll throw money in the directions of organizations that help people, but the church body won't be about bringing those people in and showing the love of Jesus, where it's that becomes just another resource. We're putting money in this way and being charitable. We're doing the right thing because we have the money to do it, but we're doing it because we have the money to do it. We're throwing money out, but not actually being that life on life connection. So that's a part of it too. And don't get me wrong, I where I live is right next door to a spot who does ministry to the homeless, and there were lots of churches that pulled up week to week during COVID when that group wasn't able to do their normal thing and they were kind of switching what they were doing. There were a number of churches that dropped off a lot of food to give to people, and I just kept wondering, is I wasn't trying to be critical or anything, but I kept wondering, is this enough? Is this enough? There should be more somehow or another. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when the churches step in, the reasons behind it, right? Like, are they just stopping by just to drop off food to, like, pat themselves on the back? And the motivation behind it, I think, with what the church does and how it steps in and engages the culture, the reason behind it, because you could have a church doing spiritual manipulation, which I think is exceptionally significant for those in church leadership to really recognize how we can easily manipulate spirituality. We can over spiritualize things, such as, hey, let's get together in this park and make it to where it's like a spiritual, which it could be a worship event that we were praying out COVID and praying in the spirit. It could also be over spiritualized, and going into a park and just getting together because you're highlighting, had that action happen in Portland where they sought to partner with the other church groups that were in the area with a prayer visual as opposed to trying to overcome them. Then you would have been like, oh, wait, this is a leadership with a heart for Jesus. I think if Jesus would have come in Portland and they were having a 24/7, 24-hour prayer vigil, and he wanted, and Peter's like, hey, Jesus, I got this new Fender and I want to just rip on it a little bit. And Jesus like, that's cool. I learned some stuff on the drum. I think Jesus would probably be drums. I don't know. He would then go into town and say, oh, well, Bartholomew's already got something going. Let's partner with them. Let's not overcome it. Like, let's not overtake it. And I think that's where you see the breakdown of leadership, right? Because leadership in the church tends to be, well, if we're powerful enough to do it, we just do it. And going back to maybe is the point that you made, Phil, or Tony, it's one of the two of you. It wasn't me. So I know I have a 50-50 chance that you there's this mindset that we need to have this militaristic, powerful leader. And I go back to these dudes that were promoting this who are no longer in church leadership. We can talk about that, but Driscoll and Hybels, back in the day, Ted Haggard, and these guys that were very power driven. And Driscoll was quoted as saying that he needs to have a Jesus, a Messiah that he knows that can kick some ass. And I'm like, why? Why do we need an aggressive and abusive Messiah? Isn't the most aggressive form of manliness going into violence and seeking to hug it out? Going on the battlefield, you've got these men and women who are violently opposed to one another. Isn't it the true leader who might be out there on the field seeking to put down the arms and saying, hey, there's a better way? There is a way, a different way, and it's called the Jesus way. I think we're afraid of Jesus leadership, though, because it seems like it's too impossible. How many times do church leaders seek to avoid the Sermon on the Mount because the Matthew 5 and the Beatitudes asking us to act this way, just it's not possible in the 21st century. So when we get to church leadership, I just wonder, though, where is the church failing? Is it avoiding avoiding raising up church leaders because we don't want to take the time to educate them. You know, it's because it's almost in a sense of the lack of church leadership is in almost an anti-relational push, and it's pressing into a Platonic, Gnostic, where it's about their professional acumen, that the leaders of the church no longer need to be raised up and trained in theological education. We're not pushing them into PhDs in theology anymore. We're pushing into certificates and, hey, get this business acumen, that part of your DMin, part of your MDiv or the THM is some sort of business understanding that, hey, you need to learn how to run the church as a business. And so part of the fault could be even in our own. The fault is our own, in the sense that maybe the education that we have for pastors isn't pastoral leadership anymore. It's much more of a worldly leadership, coming from these Christian educational institutions that are supposed to raise up church leaders. But if you continue to raise up leaders like Jesus, are they going to then press into the societal things that benefit these, seminaries and universities that need some form of financial stability? So if you're raising people up to live and to love and to lead like Jesus, then they might be like, hey, we're going to take our money and give it to the poor and the hungry. And then the institutions like nonprofits that are seeking to get money, then they're like, oh, well, we don't want to preach too much Jesus, because then these people are going to take their money and they're going to give it to, because those organizations aren't out there in the gutters, in the places where the homeless are. They're just the drive-by feedings. They drive by the homeless shelter, they throw the bags out, their goodwill, and then they leave. Not giving our first fruits to the church, it's just giving our leftovers. That's the kind of leadership that we're raising up. And so it's no wonder that we see the faultiness of any Christians coming into leadership, because how do they know? What leadership are they imitating?
And one other thing I'll weigh in here, and I don't know if this is kind of taking a little detour from the track we were going on, but being a leader, being a pastoral leader is really intoxicating. I think we brought this up in other conversations. I remember preaching 1 week during the time I was a pastor, and I remember this thought flashed across my head, and it scared me, because the thought was, I can almost say anything up here and people will agree with me. And I was like, whoa, that's really, really scary. That was really scary. And I wonder how intoxicating it is. Part of the reason why we're talking about this is in light of another pastoral leader that had a moral failure. And that's called an affair. That's called cheating on your wife. That's called, whatever else was involved there. But every year, every couple of months, we have another one of these situations where a pastor that's famous, a pastor that's a spiritual leader to someone who is famous, something or another, and they have this kind of fall. And it's just that leadership is so intoxicating. You can't be a normal person and be a pastoral leader. You have to keep your distinction. You have to be arm's length from everyone in your church. They can't actually know who you are. And times like this kind of told the tale, where we started figuring out what pastors believe politically, and we're like, yo, you need to not talk anymore. So why would they talk about this kind of stuff in church? But just recognizing that a pastor is a human too, is a thing. Pastors are people too, and they can have failures, they have their flaws, but how can we allow a leader that we don't deify to lead our church? A leader that's human. In the same way, I was just thinking of comparisons in the Bible between John the Baptist and Jesus. John came neither eating nor drinking, and you said he had a demon. Jesus came eating and drinking. You call him a glutton and a friend of sinners. Like, what? We have that same thing going on here. So that's another thing that contributes to this. Can a pastor actually be a person at his church, or he has to be deified, the deified spiritual person? So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think with the leadership, right? Like when we see, I remember one church that we were at, we were leading, and I took a group of high school students to the homeless shelter. And my challenge is to have a number of us sleep out there. We talked with the home, like they, outside, they have only so many beds. And so they have people sleep outside the shelter. Sleeping outside in anything is dangerous, but in a relative sense, this was one of the most protected because it's right outside the building. It's lit. They have people outside, security and stuff. And the blowback that I got from some of the parents was like, holy crap, no, we don't do this. Like, we'll give some time, we'll acknowledge what I was told is, do you know how much we do for them? The amount of clothes that we give to them. And I said, but what we're telling them is they're not worthy of just our presence, that we just continue. So Jesus not only met their needs, but he went and actually met them, and that's hard. And because a lot of our supposed spiritual leaders, I put that in parentheses, in quotation marks, is because they're leaders from up front, but they're so high up that we almost treat some of these pastoral leaders like they're the president of the United States. They are off limits. We were at a church one time where legitimately, and I'm not exaggerating this, the lead pastor, they called him the lead pastor, had a team of they called him the barrier, the dividing wall. And after he came off the stage, they would sit next to him in the row behind him. He would sit in the front so that no one could come afterwards and talk or engage him because he was off limits. And so if you met with you never met with him because he was basically holier than thou. He was elevated. And so, Phil, what you were saying is exactly what Tony had said a while back, is like, there is something intoxicating about the power of the word when you're sitting there speaking, and it happens in the classroom too. Being a professor, we have to wrestle with this on a daily basis. Pastoral teaching and university teaching have some of those similar things where when you're saying this stuff, you're like, holy crap, anything I say, like, wow. And Tony, you had mentioned this. You had mentioned the intoxication of that type of leadership. It's no wonder that instead of pressing into a leadership of Jesus, who all the time when they wanted to elevate, he's like, no. And he slipped away. He did the exact opposite. How many leaders today will gladly give away the mic? Oh, no, you take it. Here, you take it. No. Instead, it's the opposite. We have these leaders, and then when they do something that gives them a little notoriety, they just like, look at Metaxas. Eric Metaxas has been all over the news with these stuff and who knows what he's going to do now. He hitched his cart to the Trump, train. And so what's he going to do? But as he got bigger, like you see his radio program just continues to increase in numbers, and he just becomes more and more almost like a belligerent in the face of faith. And so it's like, yeah, the intoxication is real. Question is what leadership is a church allowing to be intoxicating?
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge I come to on a daily basis is, man, Jesus, like, your calling and your ministry is just so difficult to do, and it's just so scary. Like, it'd be easier to chase the notoriety and the fame and have everybody listen to what you say as if it was inspired a revelation. But the true Jesus way is to abandon all of that notoriety and to work at the small thing in obscurity. But that's so hard. That starves your ego, and you're like this wounded animal that's like, oh, I just need a hit. I just need a little bit of affirmation for my wounded pride. And so I think in trying to keep watch of my soul, that's the constant struggle. And I never feel like I have a good grasp on it. I'm like, Jesus, I'm always like close to the line of like feeding my own delusion of grandeur. Like, oh, like I'm like I have any sense of expertise on anything. Like it's not from me for me. And so trying to get out of that mind trip is, yeah, that's discipleship, is continual submission and conformity to who Jesus is and who he calls us to be. But man, feeding your ego is so much easier than dying to yourself. And it's such a trip, such a trip.
And it's a constant thing, and this is why we're continually discussing this. And this is next week, we're going to continue the same thing, because the three of us want to push into this with our pastoral experience and our pastoral reality, as well as the professorial, because each one of us teaches in the classroom, as well as then we pastor and we understand moving forward. And so this is where we're at, and we're wanting to engage in this dialogue. And so for those of you that are joining us by watching and stuff, feel free to reach out, because what we want is the same thing that we hope that each one of the pastoral leaders of the church today wants, is that the church to be robust in our leadership, but it has to follow the likes of Jesus, because we see the dichotomy that's splitting. We see the diverging trails in front of us, and which one are we going to take? Right now, the path less taken is the Jesus trail, and that's the one that the world's waiting for us. And so we just appreciate you joining us. And so again, get your friends out there. We want to press into this pastoral leadership. And so for the foreseeable future, the three of us and we're going to start to bring on some of our friends and some guests and stuff for pastoral leadership. And what does that look like? The pastoring church. And so if we are seeking to be, America's pastor, we live in America. We are here in the Western world. This is the church that we are a part of, and the church that we lead. And so what does it mean to be the American church from a pastoral standpoint? We want to embrace this. And so we totally appreciate each one of you joining us today. And we're going to continue, because we see we are a nation that's in need of healing, and that healing and the peace is only going to come through the church. So the question is are we willing to embrace this? We don't need to kick ass. We need to love. We don't need to kick ass and take names. What we need to do is stop and take stock at how many in front of us need love, right? And that's our heart. So on behalf of Tony and Phil, I'm Matt. This is another episode of New Wine Corked, and we were stoked that you joined us. Let everyone know that we're going to be doing this every week. New Wine on YouTube, New Wine Uncorked, and we're going to step into this because, man, we all know that the world needs love. And the only way that's going to be loved is through the church. And so join us in this endeavor of ours. So thanks for joining us once again today. New Wine Uncorked. I'm Matt Farrell. That's Tony Wynn, and that's Phil Berlin. And we appreciate you joining us. And so until next week, we'll see you on the flip side.